and always will be.
Brendan O'Connor, welcome to the program.
Good morning, David.
Now, Labor says the Army was brought in too slowly to help in the northern New South Wales flood disaster zone in particular. Whose fault was that? The minister, the top brass or the New South Wales government for knocking back early requests?
Well, I think it's the government as a whole. The Prime Minister, the Defence Minister should have responded quicker. I mean, everyone who was watching their television screens during the course of these terrible events knew that this was unprecedented and needed immediate action. And I have to say the ADF, those that are involved are doing remarkable things along with the volunteers and the emergency workers, but more should have been done earlier and more ADF personnel deployed quicker to help the communities of northern New South Wales, southeast Queensland.
But I just want to get to who makes that call, who should make that call. I mean, the government did enact the Commonwealth Disaster Management Plan, basically allows Defence to be deployed. That was on February 25. New South Wales apparently didn't ask for help formally until February 28. The commander of the Joint Task Force responsible for the flood response in Defence, Major General David Thomé, says they did all they could in difficult conditions, rescued 25 people on day one, 17 the next day, 5 helicopters were deployed on the Wednesday. Should he have called in more support than he did?
No, I think it's a political decision. The Prime Minister could have made clear and declare a national emergency. He can do that without...
That wouldn't affect troop deployments.
Well, what it does... No, but that should have been... Firstly, that should have been taken first and foremost. And let's talk about the real politic of this. A Prime Minister who is responding to a national emergency would ensure that all other decisions are made either by a minister responsible pursuant to legislation or a public official. But this didn't happen, and it didn't happen because the Prime Minister, as he has shown time and time again, David, whether it was the bushfires 2 years ago, the stroll out of the vaccinations, the delayed rollout of RATs, time and time again we've seen a Prime Minister too slow to act and then too quick to blame others when things go wrong.
OK, but are you saying the Prime Minister or the Defence Minister should be deciding how many helicopters, how many troops go into a flood zone?
I think that those operational decisions, of course, are made by ADF personnel. But the Prime Minister should have made clear from the outset, when we saw the devastation, the scale of it, David, we needed to see action immediately. And I assure you, the ADF personnel, the ADF officers involved in operational matters respond to political leadership. And if they'd seen the Prime Minister, for example, declare a national emergency quicker or certainly express concern about the speed by which these matters were happening, they would have also moved accordingly. That's not to say, and I say this repeatedly, publicly, the ADF that are involved have done a remarkable job, but it's been very difficult given the scale of the events and the extent to which the deployment had been made a week or so ago.
So I just want to be clear on this, though, because I get it, you don't want to criticise Defence, but they are operationally the ones who make decisions about what to deploy, right? Once the green light's given for Defence to be involved, they decide what assets are brought in. Are you saying, as Minister, you would actually step in and say, guys, this is more serious than you think, you need to put in more helicopters or whatever is needed?
Well, we're a civil democracy. The political leaders are those that are elected by the Australian people. We would work, of course, directly with the ADF, the CDF of the Defence Force. But if you are clear and you have the political will, those things happen. And they don't happen, or they're less likely to happen, David, if you don't see a Prime Minister act quickly enough. And we've seen time and time again...
So Defence missed
the Prime Minister failed to act on national disasters. We saw it with the bushfires, we saw it with the pandemic, we've seen it now again with these terrible disasters and events in northern New South Wales and southeast Queensland. OK,
but just to be clear on this, you're saying the Defence, and in particular the Major General who is in charge of the Joint Task Force, needed some sort of political signal from the Prime Minister to do more than he did? Well,
I think it should have been clear that the Prime Minister saw this as the top priority and a national emergency. And we have now a situation with the Prime Minister's decided to declare a national emergency for New South Wales only, not Queensland, which is, in my view, a very churlish insensitive behaviour by
just
the
on
Prime
that,
Minister.
Queensland has said they don't want it. Anastasia Palaszczuk, the Premier,
Well,
said that.
well, I think, firstly, as I say, the legislation is clear. The Prime Minister can make a decision to declare a national emergency. Frankly, the Queenslanders deserve the same approach to these matters nationally as do those of New South Wales. And what the Queensland Premier was saying was this should have happened earlier. I think
So he should override the Premier.
I think to misuse those comments to suggest that we shouldn't be getting better support to those in Queensland is wrong, and it really does speak to the character of the Prime Minister. Frankly, he should be a Prime Minister for the country, not just for one state.
Okay, again, the Premier has said she doesn't believe it's necessary. You're saying he should override that and declare a national emergency for Queensland now?
I think there was an emergency beyond the boundaries of one state, and I think it was incumbent on the Prime Minister some time ago, not wait till he arrived for private meetings in Lismore, but some time ago he should have declared a national emergency because it goes beyond the boundaries of one state, and that's what national leadership does.
We're going to face more frequent and more intense natural disasters. The climate science is clear on that. Should Defence have a dedicated unit, even a separate force, alongside Army, Navy and Air Force to deal with humanitarian assistance and natural disasters?
Well, I do believe that the incidence of natural disasters are increasing as a result of climate change. I do believe, therefore, the non-military deployment of the ADF is also increasing, and that's at the same time, David, as you know, that we have increased instability in the region where we require, I think, a more significant effort in terms of potential military investment. So there will be certainly a need for us to consider what we do here.
What do you think?
Well, I'll just go to this point first. Anthony Albanese made clear that within the first 4 months of an Albanese Labor government, we'd be looking at the climate change threat assessment, and we'd be making a series of decisions. And I think under that umbrella, one of the matters that would be under consideration is whether, in fact, we would continue to deploy the Defence Force in the way we are, or whether we need to think of some other means to respond so rapidly to the scale of the natural disasters that we're experiencing. And I think it's fair to say that that we need to obviously examine that issue, whether in fact we'd have some other form of investment in another area, or that, in other words, a national emergency established task force, or whether in fact we'd deploy the ADF, including reservists. I think that's something we should examine as a matter of priority, because we are seeing increased threats, increased natural disasters, and a constant deployment of ADF forces to look after communities, which is a good thing, and it should be happening, and the ADF want to help, but I'm not sure it's sustainable in the way in which it's currently operating.
Is this the idea? Peter Cosgrove, the former Defence Chief, former Governor General, has raised the idea of a national civilian agency to do some of this work.
I think that's certainly something that we need to examine. There's been a whole series of propositions put forward by the former CDF Chris Barry, Peter Cosgrove, defence analyst John Blaxland. There's a whole series of people that have put forward, I think, very useful propositions that I know an incoming Albanese Labor government would consider as a matter of urgency because of the combination of the increased incidence of natural disasters, and also the need for our Defence Force to be trained for military purposes.
Could be an expensive task, though, couldn't it?
Well, it may be, but what's more expensive is doing nothing on climate change. And I think, frankly, part of the problem we have is we've had a government in denial for almost a decade on climate change, and we need to do more, and globally we need to see more done so that these matters can be mitigated over time. I mean, that's not going to happen in the immediate sense, but we can't leave it any longer, and it's for that reason we've outlined a difference with respect to climate change, and why I think we work closer with our partners in the United States, United Kingdom and Europe and other parts of the world in responding to climate change, compared with the current government does.
Let's come back to defence, though, right now, and Labor's record. A lot of debate about this, as we've seen over recent weeks. Labor likes to talk about the average defence spend during its 6 years in office, but it did fall considerably in your last 2 years in office compared to where it began, down to 1.56% of GDP. The number of troops fell as well. We can see it here, in fact. These are numbers drawn from the Defence Annual Report. You can see troop numbers fell in your last 2 years in office as well. They're just over 56,000. Do you acknowledge Labor cut defence spending too far? Was this a mistake in hindsight?
I think we were dealing with a number of challenges, and I think it's fair to say we were not getting the same advice as the current government in relation to changed circumstances in the region.
What, from defence?
Well, can I say, firstly, we were dealing with, we're responding to a global financial crisis at the time. But let's be clear, and I think it does matter, the facts do matter, that when we compare the Howard years with the Rudd-Gillard years, all governments spent 1.7 to 1.8% of GDP.
Not in your last 2 years.
On average.
Not in your last 2 years.
But on average, David, and that's important. But I think...
Sure, if you start with what you inherited from the Howard government.
Well, I think times have changed insofar as changed circumstances. The 2020 strategic update has made clear that we don't...
Were you getting bad advice? Is that what you're saying at the time?
No, what I'm saying, I think what you'd have to concede, I mean, you know, it was a different time. You know, we had John Howard was inviting the President of China to address the Parliament when he was Prime Minister. It is a different time. The advice we received by Defence in 2020, that this government's received, has made clear that the 10-year notice of warning for any potential serious conflict has changed, and therefore investment has had to increase. And we have supported, and have supported since 2013, a minimum of 2% of investment in defence, and I can see that rising over time, as can the Labor leader and the parliamentary Labor
Let's talk
Party.
about that future then, on the nuclear-powered submarines in particular. Are you committed to buying them regardless of cost, where they might be built or when they might be delivered?
Well, there are a series of questions we'll have to make a decision on. We immediately supported the AUKUS arrangement. It went through Shadow Cabinet and caucus, as you know, David, but we support it because it's the right decision for the country. It's in our national interest. But we also wanted to be a part of a bipartisan approach to assessing and considering the AUKUS arrangement, but that was declined by the Prime Minister, I think, mistakenly. I think the Prime Minister has too often used national security as a partisan plaything. It doesn't help the country, and it certainly doesn't help the government, as you've seen recently with the former and current National Security Agency heads,
but on the submarines,
rebuking the Prime Minister and the Defence Minister for their conduct in debasing national security for political purposes.
OK, just coming back to the question on submarines, though, is your support a blank cheque, regardless of what they cost and when they might be delivered?
Well, there's no such thing as a blank cheque, and what we'd like to think that we will be better at managing the defence contracts. You only have to look at the litany of disasters we've seen over the last 9 years of this government in terms of defence contracts. I mean, they like to talk about spending and spending more on defence, but David, you don't get to boast about spending more on defence when you're wasting billions on failed or cancelled contracts. That is not good use of taxpayers' money, and it's not actually delivering defence assets to this country. OK, but just on the submarines,
sure. What would you be willing to spend if you're saying it's not a blank cheque? What's your limit? Well,
obviously it's significant. We've made it very clear that we support the project.
At what price?
We need to make sure we have capability, David. I'm not going to sit here and give you a set number. We need to be in government, getting the advice from national security agencies, talking to our AUKUS partners, and having a full understanding of the situation.
But if it's too much, you'd say no.
Well, right? I don't think the question of too much. There is no investment too much when it comes to securing our citizens and our country.
So it is a blank cheque.
I mean, well, you can keep throwing around those sort of silly terms. The fact is, we'll spend money wisely. We'll make sure that we deliver the defence assets required. That's why Anthony Albanese, quite rightly, recommended to caucus that we support this arrangement, that is the AUKUS arrangement, as we do support the re-enlivening of the Quad by, led by President Biden. These are important decisions at a time of material changes to our region. I think that's really important. But I just make this point because you've had a few shots at me about this matter. One of the biggest problems, David, that we have in this area is we have advice that talks about an immediate and intense risk to our national security, except we do not see increased firepower to our current defence assets. And we need to see those platforms with better firepower, which will bring about increased deterrent now, not in 2040, not in 2038. And that's one of the problems with this government. It talks big, it delivers very, very little.
All right, Brendan O'Connor, Shadow Defence Minister. Appreciate you joining us this morning. Thank you.
Thanks very much, David.
All right, well,